The night it happened is burned into my memory, like fire on skin. One moment, my wife, Emily, was standing by the front gate with her soft laugh floating across the yard, her hand brushing mine as she whispered something silly only I could understand. The next moment, flashing red and blue lights ripped through our peaceful street, shattering everything we thought we knew about safety. I didn't even realize at first that those men weren't real cops. Their fake badges gleamed. They're harsh. Voices barked orders, and before I could piece it together, one of them shoved Emily so hard she hit the ground with a crack that echoed in my bones. My world collapsed in that instant. And I swear I saw the stars themselves grow cold as she gasped for breath. I ran to her side, my chest tight with panic, but one of them shoved me back, spitting words about violations and rules. They looked like they belonged to some official authority, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Emily tried to push herself up, pain twisting her face, but the man who hit her sneered like he'd done nothing. Her head tilted slightly, confusion clouding her eyes, and a drop of blood trickled down her cheek. That image carved itself into my soul, and in that moment, rage settled into me so deep it felt like it fused with my veins. The HOA had been a thorn in our side since the day we moved in. It's always sending letters, making threats, and inventing rules just to break us down. But this wasn't some fine or empty warning. They sent imposters. They sent men dressed as cops to intimidate us. And in their arrogance, they laid hands on my wife, the woman who had already carried more than her fair share of pain in life. I carried Emily into the house, her body trembling against mine. She tried to brush it off, whispering that she was fine, but her voice shook, betraying the truth. My hands were shaking as I pressed ice against her bruise, and the thought of calling the real cops flickered through my mind. But something in Emily's eyes stopped me. It wasn't fear, it was a spark, small but fierce. She whispered, "Don't. Don't let them get away with this." That's when I remembered the stories. Emily's twin brothers, Ethan and Evan, Navy SEALs. Men who lived in the shadows, who carried with them the kind of steel resolve only war could forge. They weren't just her brothers, they were her protectors. And though years had passed since they'd been home for more than a holiday, I knew one phone call could bring them back. I dialed Ethan first. The silence on the line after I told him what happened was heavier than thunder. His voice, when it finally came, was cold and measured. "Send me the names, the address, everything. You know, we'll be there by morning." By we, I knew he meant both of them. Emily tried to protest, her gentle nature torn between not wanting to drag her brothers into this and the aching need for justice. But I saw the way her hand clutched mine tighter, the silent plea in her eyes. She didn't want revenge for herself, she wanted to protect us. To make sure no one else would ever suffer like she just had. That night was long. I didn't sleep. Emily finally drifted off in my arms, but every time she winced in her sleep, a new wave of fury rose in me. My mind replayed the scene over and over, the fake cop's sneer, the shove, the sound of her body hitting the ground. By the time dawn stretched pale across the sky, my anger had crystallized into something sharp and unshakable. When Ethan and Evan arrived, they didn't waste time with comfort or questions. They were steel in human form, moving with a quiet intensity that sent chills down my spine. They looked at Emily with a softness only family could show, but the moment they saw the bruise blooming across her cheek, their faces darkened. Ethan leaned in close to her, his voice low but steady. "You don't have to say a word, Em. We've got this. They'll never touch you again." Evan stood by the window, scanning the street like he was already calculating battle lines. "This isn't just about her," he said flatly. "This is about making sure no one else gets hurt. They think they're untouchable. We'll show them they're not." I watched them exchange a look-silent communication, forged from years of combat, side by side. For the first time since last night, I felt something other than fear. I felt the stirrings of hope. The brothers spent hours gathering details, listening carefully as I described the imposters. They wanted everything: their appearance, their voices, their car. Then they asked about the HOA, pushing for names of board members, patterns of harassment. Every dirty trick they'd pulled since we moved in. By the time the sun began its descent, Ethan's notebook was filled with a plan. Emily sat quietly through most of it, her hand resting against her cheek. But when she finally spoke, her voice was steady, though laced with pain. Don't just punish them. Expose them. Make sure everyone sees what they really are. That was Emily. Even in her suffering, she thought of others. She wanted justice, not just vengeance. Ethan and Evan nodded, but I saw in their eyes that they weren't going to settle for half measures. These men had lived in worlds where justice and survival walked hand in hand, and they weren't about to let their sister's pain go unanswered. That night, the air felt heavy with what was coming, the calm before the storm. Ethan and Evan were already moving, making calls, contacting people I didn't know existed, and I realized with a shiver that once they set their sights on someone, there was no escape. Emily held my hand as we watched them work, her head resting against my shoulder. "They won't stop," she whispered. "No," I said quietly, watching the shadows grow outside our window. And that's exactly what scares me for them. Because I knew the men who had hurt my wife had no idea what kind of storm was about to crash down on their lives. The next morning began in a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Heavy, like the pause before a predator strikes. Emily moved slower than usual, wincing whenever she bent to pick something up or turned her head too quickly. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight, spreading like ink across her pale skin, and every time I looked at it, anger burned through me again. I wanted to rage, to scream, to storm the HOA office myself, but one look at Ethan and Evan told me I didn't need to. They were already carrying that fire, and theirs burned hotter, sharper, more controlled. I had seen these men as brothers-in-law, men who teased Emily when she cooked their favorite meals, who wrestled with me on the front lawn like we were kids. But that morning, I saw something different in their eyes. I saw the Navy SEALs, the soldiers who had survived things I couldn't imagine, the men who knew how to dismantle enemies piece by piece. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, open, a steaming mug of coffee untouched by his elbow. He had already mapped out a plan, pages of names, times, HOA bylaws, and even details about the fake cop uniforms. Evan was by the door, cleaning what looked like surveillance equipment, his movements methodical, precise. Emily sat across from them, her shoulders hunched but her eyes clear. "We're not doing anything illegal," Emily said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I don't want you to go to jail for me." Evan looked up at her, his jaw tightening. What they did was illegal. They assaulted you. They impersonated officers. If the real police won't handle it, then we will. But we're not going to break laws. We're going to use their own arrogance against them." Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady. "They wanted to scare you. They thought no one would stand up. But they don't know you've got us. And we're going to make sure they regret every second of that decision." Emily's lips trembled, and I could see the war inside her, the part of her that hated violence, and the part of her that desperately wanted justice. She reached across the table and took Ethan's hand, then Evan's. Promise me you'll be careful." Both men nodded. And in that quiet moment, I realized just how deep their bond went, not just as twins, not just as soldiers, but as siblings who would burn the world before they let anyone hurt their sister. Again, That afternoon, we drove to the neighborhood's central HOA office. It was a squat little building tucked near the community pool, one I had passed dozens of times without giving it much thought. But walking in with Ethan and Evan at my side, I felt the atmosphere shift. The receptionista, middle-aged woman with a forced smile, looked up, her face paling slightly at the sight of us. She recognized Emily's bruise immediately. "We'd like to speak to the board," Ethan said flatly. His voice like steel, the woman stammered, trying to push us toward paperwork, toward scheduled meetings. But Evan leaned forward, his presence like a wall of stone. "Now," he said. The board members arrived in less than 15 minutes, shuffled into the conference room like they were being dragged to judgment. I'd seen them before, at community barbecues or during petty complaints about lawn heights and fence colors. They were smug people who thrived on rules they invented, using power like a toy. But now, sitting across from Ethan and Evan, they looked smaller, weaker. Ethan laid a folder on the table. Inside were photos he had already pulled. From our home security camera, the fake cops at our gate. The moment Emily hit the ground, the license plate of their car. He slid the images across the table one by one, his eyes never leaving theirs. "You sent these men," Ethan said. His tone wasn't a question, it was a verdict. The board members shifted uncomfortably, trading nervous glances. The president, a balding man named Richard, finally cleared his throat. We didn't authorize anything like this. Those aren't even HOA members." Evan slammed his fist down on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "Don't lie to us. You wanted to intimidate them. You crossed a line, and now we're going to cross back." Emily flinched at the sound, but Ethan reached over and touched her hand gently. "Easy, Evie," he murmured, then looked back at the board. "Here's how this is going to go. You're going to tell us exactly who those men are. You're going to explain how they ended up at our house dressed as cops, and you're going to do it right now." Richard tried to bluster, muttering about lawyers and rights, but Ethan leaned forward, his gaze like a blade. "Do you really want us to take this to the police? 'Cause I can promise you impersonating an officer carries a prison sentence. Assaulting a woman? That's even worse. And we have it all on tape. Or," he paused, letting the silence drag, "you can talk to us, right now. And maybe we make this easier for you." The silence stretched until finally one of the younger board members cracked. His voice was shaky. It was Richard's idea. He said if the real cops wouldn't enforce the rules, we should find people who would. He knew a guy. Said he could send a message. Emily gasped softly, her hand tightening in mine. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. They had paid criminals to pose as cops, just to scare us. Just to break us. Ethan leaned back, his jaw tightening. He didn't look at Richard, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Evan's smile was sharp, cold. That's all we needed to hear. We walked out without another word, leaving. The board members pale and trembling. Outside, Emily stopped us, her voice low. "What are you going to do?" Ethan looked at her, his face softer than it had been all day. "We're going to take everything they've built, their power, their reputation, their pride. We'll strip it away until all that's left is the truth." Evan's eyes burned as he added, "And they'll wish they'd never touched you." That night, as the crickets chirped outside our window, I watched the twins working again, making calls, setting traps, gathering allies. Emily lay beside me, her breathing slow, her head resting against my chest. But even in her sleep, I could feel the tension in her body. I kissed her hair softly and whispered, "It's going to be okay." But even as I said it, I knew the storm hadn't even begun. I'll never forget the way Ethan and Evan looked that next morning like wolves who had picked up a fresh trail. They weren't loud about it. They didn't storm through the house with plans spilling from their mouths. No, their silence was heavier than any words. Their movements were efficient, calm, purposeful. It was the kind of quiet that made you realize they weren't just angry, they were preparing for war. Emily sat at the table with her tea, her fingers curled tight around the mug. The bruise on her cheek was fading into purple and green, but it still stood out against her skin like a mark of betrayal. She tried to smile when I sat beside her, but it never reached her eyes. Every time the door creaked or a car drove by outside, she flinched, her hand twitching toward mine. Seeing her like that, my strong, soft-hearted wife reduced to nervous shadows lit a fire in me that words could never capture. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching her with the kind of eyes only a twin brother could have. He knew her pain without her speaking it. He set a folder down in front of her. "We've identified the men, both of them." My stomach twisted. He opened the folder and laid out photos, names, addresses. One's name is Carl Dixon, the other's Greg Mason, both with records DUI, assault, petty theft. They're not cops, never were. Just thugs hired to play dress-up. Emily's lips parted, her breath sharp. And Richard, the HOA president, he hired them. Evan's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists, paid them in cash. Thought he could scare you, shut you up, didn't care if you got hurt. The words hit like stones. Emily's eyes filled, and she pressed her hands to her face. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, but she shook her head. "I just don't understand," she whispered. "What kind of person does that? Just for rules, for control?" Her brothers exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations they'd perfected over years of missions together. Ethan's voice was quiet, steady. "It's never about rules, Em. It's about power. And power like that only stops when someone stronger takes it away." Later that day, we drove to the edge of town where Carl Dixon lived. His house was a run-down single-story, with peeling paint and trash piled by the porch. We stayed in the car at first, Emily's hand gripping mine so hard her knuckles went white. Ethan and Evan didn't move right away. They just watched, studying everything. The broken blinds, the beer cans scattered in the yard. The way the man himself stumbled out onto the porch to smoke, his face rough with stubble. "That's him," Ethan said simply. Emily stiffened beside me, her breath shallow, a tease. "He's the one who shoved me." I felt her tremble, and I wished I could shield her from even the sight of him. But her brothers were already moving. They didn't approach like thugs. They walked calm, steady, their presence like a storm rolling in. Carl squinted at them, muttering something about not buying anything, until Ethan pulled a photo from his pocket, one of him dressed as a fake cop at our gate. "You remember this?" Ethan's voice was ice. Carl froze, the cigarette dropping from his fingers. I don't know what you're talking about." Evan stepped closer, towering over him. "You shoved our sister. You put your hands on her. And you think you can just walk away from that?" The man's face paled. He stammered, his eyes darting to the street like he was looking for escape. "I was just doing a job, man." "They paid me." Ethan cut him off. "Who paid you?" Carl's lips trembled. "The HOA guy. Richard, he said it was just a scare tactic." Evan grabbed him by the collar, pulling him close. "A scare tactic? You could have killed her." His voice rumbled low, dangerous. "If you ever come near her again, if you so much as breathe in her direction, you won't. Walk away next time." Carl's whole body shook. He nodded so fast it looked painful. Ethan finally stepped between them, prying Evan's hand loose. "Not here, not yet." His eyes stayed locked on Carl. "You're going to stay quiet. You're going to forget our names. But understand this, you're done. You'll never work for them again. You so much as touch a badge, even a fake one. And we'll be there." Carl crumpled back against the wall, his breath ragged. I'd never seen a man look so small. We drove away in silence. Emily leaned against me, her tears soaking my shirt. But they weren't tears of weakness, they were something deeper. Relief, rage, exhaustion. That night, Ethan spread out new papers across the table. Greg Mason, the second thug, had a different address, a different pattern. "We'll pay him a visit tomorrow," Ethan said. But Emily shook her head. "It's not enough," she whispered. "Stopping those minutes, not enough. The board. Richard, they're the ones pulling the strings. If you only go after the pawns, they'll just find new ones." Ethan's eyes softened as he looked at her. "What are you asking, Em?" She lifted her head, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I want the whole HOA exposed. I want everyone to know what they did, not just punished in private. I want them humiliated in front of the people they think they control." Her brothers didn't smile. They didn't joke. But something in their posture shifted. Ethan closed his notebook and nodded slowly. "Then we'll take their power, piece by piece." Evan leaned back, his arms crossed, eyes burning. "We'll destroy the HOA from the inside out. They won't even see it coming."
Emily
Exhaled, her hands sliding into mine. For the first time in days, I felt the weight in her chest ease just a little. But deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The pawns had been warned. Now it was time to go after the king. The following morning felt different. The air carried a strange electricity, like the sky was waiting for a storm. Emily moved slower than usual, but there was something new in her eyes' resolve. The fear was still there, but layered on top of it now was steel. She wasn't just surviving what had happened anymore. She was preparing herself to fight back in her own way. Ethan and Evan were already at the table when I walked in. Maps, notes, and HOA documents spread out like a battlefield plan. They had pulled up bylaws, public records, even financial reports. I didn't ask how they got at some doors, just opened when Navy SEALs came knocking. What they found was worse than I imagined. "The HOA's been siphoning money," Ethan said, tapping his pen on a highlighted section. "Dues paid by families in this neighborhood are being funneled into personal accounts. And guess whose name shows up again and again?" Emily's lips parted. "Richard." Evan nodded, his jaw tight. He's been running this like his own little kingdom. The fines, the intimidation, even fake enforcement hits, all to keep people scared while he lines his pockets. He didn't just hire those thugs to hit you. He's been using people like them for years. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for the papers, scanning the numbers, the names. "People trust them," she whispered. "They think the HOA keeps order, and all this time it was just corruption." Her voice cracked, and I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "This is how we take them down. Not with fists, not with guns, with truth, with exposure." The plan unfolded over the next few hours. Ethan and Evan weren't just thinking about retaliation. They were thinking about dismantling the entire system Richard had built. Step 1. Gather proof. Step 2. Spread it where everyone could see it. Step 3. Make sure Richard and his cronies couldn't wriggle free when the hammer fell by mid-afternoon. They had already tapped into networks I didn't know existed. Friends from their Navy days, people who owed them favors, journalists, lawyers, even a retired judge. Each call was quiet, calculated, and each one pushed the storm closer. That evening, we sat in the living room, the weight of what we were about to do pressing down like lead. Emily curled up on the couch, her brothers flanking her on either side. The lamp cast a soft glow across her bruise, now fading but still a brutal reminder. She broke the silence first. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not for me, for you, for all of us. What if Richard fights back? What if he hurts someone else?" Ethan took her hand gently. He already did the worst thing he could. He touched you. Everything after that is just fallout. And fallout we can handle. Evan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. We've been in worse situations, seen men like him. Before cowards who build power out of fear. They all break the same way. We just need to push. Emily looked between them, her eyes glistening. Promise me it won't consume you. I don't want this to turn you into monsters. Our words hung in the air. Ethan's gaze softened. You're the reason we're not monsters, Em. You've always been the light that kept us from going too far. We'll finish this the way it needs to be finished, but we'll do it your way, with justice. Later that night, long after Emily had drifted into an easy sleep, Ethan and Evan laid out the next step. We weren't just going to confront Richard. We were going to set a trap. He's greedy, Ethan said quietly, spreading documents across the table. Greedy men always think they're smarter than everyone else. We'll use that. Evan smirked, though there was no humor in it. We'll leak just enough for him to panic. He'll scramble to cover his tracks, and when he does, he'll expose himself. All we need is bait. My stomach churned as I listened. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about destruction. The careful, methodical kind. But deep down, I knew it was the only way to make sure Richard and his board never hurt another family again. The next morning, things moved fast. Ethan sent anonymous tips to local reporters about financial irregularities in the HOA. Evan slipped copies of incriminating documents into neighbors' mailboxes. Whispers spread like wildfire across the community, people asking questions, comparing notes, realizing they weren't alone in feeling cheated. By noon, the HOA office was buzzing with panic. We watched from across the street as board members rushed in and out, their faces pale, their phones glued to their ears. Richard himself stormed into the building, his expression twisted with fury. Emily stood beside me, her arms crossed tightly, her body trembling. It's starting, she whispered. Ethan's eyes stayed locked on the building. This is just the beginning. That night, the neighborhood Facebook group exploded with posts, people sharing stories of unfair fines, intimidation, even threats. Some even mentioned strange officers who had shown up at their doors. The truth was unraveling faster than Richard could contain it. And then came the breaking point. Richard showed up at our house. The knock was hard, angry, rattling the door in its frame. Emily stiffened, clutching my arm. Ethan motioned for her to stay back as he opened the door. Richard stood there, his face red, his body vibrating with rage. You think you're clever? He spat, his finger jabbing toward us. You think you can embarrass me? You don't know who you're messing with. Ethan didn't flinch. Know exactly who we're messing with. And so does the entire neighborhood now. Richard's eyes darted past him to Emily, standing just behind me. His lip curled. She's the problem. She's been nothing but trouble since she moved in. All of this chaos sits on her. That was the moment Evan stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway like a shadow. His voice was low, dangerous. Say her name again, I dare you. Richard's face faltered. He tried to puff himself up, but for the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off into the night. Ethan closed the door slowly, locking it behind him. He turned to Emily, his voice calm. That was his mistake. Coming here, threatening you again. Now it's personal. And when it's personal, we don't stop until the enemy is finished. Emily pressed a hand to her chest, her breath shaky. This is going to get worse before it gets better, isn't it? I pulled her close, resting my chin on her hair. Yes, I whispered. But this time, we're not alone. And for the first time since that awful night, I believed it. The morning after Richard's outburst at our door, the neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. Everywhere we went, whispers followed. Neighbors who used to glance away when we passed now looked us straight in the eye, some even nodding in quiet solidarity. It was as if Richard's mask had cracked, and for the first time, people saw the rot beneath his polished smile. But Richard wasn't a man to back down. He was wounded, cornered, and dangerous. That made him more unpredictable than ever. Emily tried to go about her day as normal, folding laundry, watering her plants. But I could see the tension in her every movement. Her hands shook when she held the watering can, her eyes flicking toward the window as if she expected Richard to come charging back at any moment. I wanted to tell her it was over, that her brothers had everything under control, but even I couldn't believe that lie. The truth was, we were teetering on the edge of something big, and I wasn't sure who would fall first. Ethan and Evan weren't just sitting idle. They moved like men on a mission, making calls, setting up meetings, gathering more evidence. They'd already found enough to bury Richard in a courtroom, but they weren't aiming for quiet justice anymore. They wanted to make a point-aloud, unforgettable one. That afternoon, Evan came into the living room with a flash drive in his hand. He dropped it on the table with a sharp tap. "This is it," he said. "Bank transfers, kickbacks even. Emails. Everything we need to prove the HOA has been stealing from the community." Emily's eyes widened. She picked up the drive like it was something fragile. "Where did you get this?" Evan's lips curved into a humorless smile. "Let's just say Richard isn't as careful with his passwords as he thinks." Ethan crossed his arms. "We'll give it to the right people. Reporters, lawyers, neighbors. By the time we're done, Richard won't just lose his position. He'll lose every ounce of power he ever had." But Emily wasn't smiling. Her fingers tightened around the drive, her voice breaking. "I don't want him to just lose power. I want him to feel what I felt that night. I want him to know what it's like to be helpless." Her words sliced through the room. For a moment, even her brothers were silent. Then Ethan knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her knee. "He will, Em. Trust me, he already does. That's why he came to our door last night, desperate and shaking. He's cracking, and soon he'll break." That evening, the plan began. Ethan arranged a meeting at the community center, inviting every homeowner. Flyers appeared in mailboxes. Posts went up online. The headline was simple: "The truth about your HOA." Richard must have gotten wind of it, because by the next morning, his people were scrambling. Signs popped up around the neighborhood claiming the meeting was fake, that it was slander. But instead of deterring people, it only made them more curious. When the evening came, the community center was packed. Families filled the folding chairs, whispers buzzing through the air. I sat beside Emily, her hand clutching mine so tightly I could feel her pulse racing through her skin. Ethan stood at the front, his posture calm, commanding. Evan was at his side, his presence alone enough to silence the crowd when they started to murmur too loudly. Ethan spoke slowly, clearly laying out the evidence, piece by piece. Photos, documents, bank statements, each slide that flashed across. The projector pulled more gasps, more angry mutters from the crowd. Neighbors leaned forward, their eyes wide, their jaws clenched. They weren't just listening, they were waking up. When Ethan revealed the fake cop scheme, the room erupted. Shouts, curses, people standing to their feet demanding answers. Emily flinched at the noise, but then something happened that made her eyes well with tears. One by one, neighbors turned to her, their faces filled with sympathy, outrage, and support. For the first time, she wasn't alone. Richard stormed in halfway through, his face red, his voice booming. "This is all lies, fabrications. These people are trying to destroy everything we've built here. The crowd didn't back him. They shouted him down, voices rising together like a tide. You lied to us. You stole our money. You hurt her. Richard's eyes landed on Emily, and for a split second, I saw that same sneer he wore the night he sent his thugs. But this time, he wasn't facing a scared couple at their gate. He was facing an entire community that had turned against him. Ethan stepped forward, blocking Richard's view of Emily. His voice was calm, but it carried through the room like thunder. It's over, Richard. You don't own these people anymore. You don't control them, and soon, the law will make sure you never hold power again. The crowd cheered. For the first time, Richard looked small, cornered. He sputtered threats, promises of lawsuits, but no one listened. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. When the meeting ended, neighbors surrounded us. They hugged. Emily thanked her for speaking out, promised they'd stand with us. Emily's tears flowed freely, but they weren't just from pain, they were from relief. From finally feeling safe in the arms of a community that once turned a blind eye. Later. That night, back at home, Ethan and Evan stood by the window, watching the street. He won't stop, Evan said quietly. A man like that doesn't walk away, he'll come back harder. Ethan nodded, then we'll be ready. Next time, he won't just lose his reputation, he'll lose everything. Emily sat beside me on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder. I don't want him to come back, she whispered. I kissed her hair, my chest heavy. Neither do I. But if he does. I glanced at her brothers, their silhouettes sharp against the glass. He won't stand a chance, and I meant it. Because I could feel it in the air. Richard's end was coming. And when it did, it would be final. The night felt endless, heavy with rage and helplessness as I replayed the moment Sarah's head struck the porch steps. Every time her body flinched in pain in that hospital bed, I felt the weight of my own failure press harder on my chest. Her brothers, Derek and Daniel, never left her side. Derek paced like a caged animal, his fists clenching so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. Daniel, on the other hand, sat silently, but the quiet around him was far more terrifying than Derek's storm. His eyes were sharp, cold, the kind of stare that only a man trained for war could hold. I had no doubt something inside both of them had been triggered the second they realized what those men had done. The doctors said Sarah was lucky her concussion wasn't severe enough to cause permanent damage, but she needed rest. Peace, no stress. How could I give her that when our neighborhood, our supposed safe place, was run by thugs hiding behind HOA badges? Her eyes fluttered open at one point, and the first words she whispered were, "Don't let them win." That broke me. She was in pain, half-conscious, yet her spirit still burned. I promised her right then I wouldn't let this slide. But I didn't realize how far her brothers were willing to take that same vow. Back home, the air in the house was thick. Derek spread maps across the dining table, neighborhood layouts, HOA contact lists, even patrol schedules he had pulled somehow. "These guys aren't real cops," he growled, stabbing his finger into the map. "They're playing soldier, but they don't know what real soldiers look like." Daniel's voice cut in, low and steady. "We don't scare them. They'll come back. This isn't about fines anymore. They've tasted power. They'll use it again." I stood there, watching the two of them, feeling the ground shift under me. What was this going to become? A war. 2 days later, while Sarah rested upstairs, Derek and Daniel convinced me to ride with them. "You need to see the truth for yourself," Daniel said. We parked a few streets away from the HOA office building, polished brick structure that looked harmless in the daylight. But as the hours dragged toward evening, the shadows brought the truth to light. One by one, cars pulled in. Men stepped out, wearing tactical vests marked with HOA security. They carried batons, tasers, and even what looked like old service pistols. They laughed, joked, smoked cigars, like a gang celebrating territory they'd claimed. Derek pulled out binoculars and shoved them into my hand. "You see that?" he whispered. My stomach twisted. These weren't community volunteers. These were bullies with weapons, a militia dressed up as law. Then a black SUV pulled up. Stepped Rick, the HOA president, a smug man who always wore pressed suits at community meetings. But tonight, he had no tie, no smile, just a man puffing on a cigar, slapping backs, passing envelopes. Derek muttered, "That's payment. Protection money from residents who settle instead of fighting fines." I felt my blood heat. People in our neighborhood, families like mine, were being extorted. And Sarah, she was just the latest. Victim who refused to kneel, Derek leaned in close. "We can end this, but you have to decide if you're in." My throat tightened. Ending this sounded righteous. But what did ending this mean in their language? These men weren't like me. They'd lived in war zones, breathed combat. For them, justice often came dressed as vengeance. I hesitated, but then I thought of Sarah lying in that hospital bed, her spirit dimming. My fists clenched. I'm in. The plan unfolded over the next week like something from a movie I never wanted to be part of. Derek and Daniel trained. Me basic drills, self-defense, even how to move quietly through the dark. I stumbled, messed up, felt out of place, but every time I wanted to quit, Derek's voice would snap. "Your wife deserves better than fear." Daniel would add, "They won't stop unless we stop them." Those words stuck. The night finally came when we moved. Sarah was staying with her parents, safe for now. That gave me the courage to step into the storm with her brothers. We dressed in black, carried nothing that could link back to us, and slipped through the shadows of our own neighborhood. Every corner felt alive with danger. My heart pounded, not from the fear of being caught, but from the fear of failing. The HOA office had guards posted outside. But Derek was quick and brutal. He disarmed one before the man even realized what hit him. Daniel's methods were quieter, dragging another into the darkness. I followed their lead, my breath ragged, adrenaline shaking through me. Inside, the office was buzzing with low voices. We could hear them talking about teaching. More residents, a lesson. My stomach turned, but my fear burned into fury. We burst in. Chaos erupted. Derek's voice boomed like thunder. "This ends tonight." Faces turned white. Some tried to grab weapons, but Daniel's precision was merciless, disarming, pinning, controlling. I wasn't perfect, but I managed to shove one of them against the wall, shouting through clenched teeth, "You think this is power? You hurt families." The man's eyes widened. For the first time, they weren't the predators, they were the prey. But the climax of that night wasn't the fight. It was Derek shoving Rick, the smug president, against his own desk, forcing him to his knees. Derek hissed in his ear, "You like pretending you're in charge? You like playing cop? How about you face real soldiers?" Rick trembled, all his arrogance draining in seconds. Daniel leaned close, his words sharp as knives. "You have two choices. Step down, leave, and never come back, or we expose everything you've been running here. Extortion, fraud, assault. We'll burn your empire down in front of you." Rick broke. He begged, actually begged, to be spared. For a second, I almost felt pity till Sarah's bruised face flashed in my mind. No, this man didn't deserve pity. Derek released him, but not before spitting the final warning. "Touch this neighborhood again, and you won't live to regret it." We left the office with their fear echoing in the walls. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't since. That night, control, but as we walked back through the quiet streets, Daniel's voice cut through the night. "This isn't over. Men like that don't quit easy. They'll come back harder." And I realized with a shiver that this was just the beginning of the real war. The storm came faster than we expected. For a week after we raided the HOA office, the neighborhood felt lighter, almost free. Families walked outside again. Kids rode bikes without the constant fear of being stopped by fake security. Sarah was home, healing slowly, her color returning. The first time in weeks, I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd put an end to it. But Derek was right. Men like Rick don't just walk away. They regroup. They come back nastier. It started with letters. Bright red envelopes slipped under doors, stamped with HOA seals, demanding back dues and threatening property seizures. People panicked. Some came to me, whispering, "What do we do?" I didn't have answers. Then came the vans unmarked. Blacked out, rolling through the neighborhood late at night. Men inside with radios, watching houses, watching us. They weren't gone. They were escalating. One night around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps on our lawn. I peeked through the blinds and froze. 3 men, dressed in tactical gear, circling our porch. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed my phone, but before I could call anyone, headlights cut across the street. A truck roared down, skidding. To a stop, Derek jumped out, shotgun in hand, Daniel flanking him like a shadow. "Get the hell off this property." Derek's voice tore through the night. The men scattered, but one turned, raising his weapon. A crack rang out, not from Derek, not from Daniel, but from me. My old hunting rifle smoked in my hands. The bullet missed his leg by inches. He dropped his weapon and ran into the dark. My hands shook, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't a victim anymore. The next morning, Derek slammed his fist on our table. "This ends tonight. No more waiting for them to knock on our doors." Daniel slid a folder toward me, full of evidence photos, bank transfers, secret recordings. "We hit them with this, and if that doesn't work, we burn the rest to the ground." I looked at Sarah, who was sipping tea, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. She nodded. "Do it." That evening, the showdown came. We stormed the HOA clubhouse just as they held their secret meeting. Dozens of them sat around the long oak table, files spread out, money exchanging hands. Rick sat at the head, smug as ever, until he saw Derek. And Daniel stepped in behind me. The room went silent. Derek slammed a duffel bag onto the tablet, spilled photos, documents, proof of everything. "This is over," he growled. Rick sneered, trying to play calm. "You can't touch me. I've got men, lawyers, cops." Daniel cut him off cold. "You don't have us. And you don't have this." He held up a flash drive. "Every crime you've committed, every resident you've stolen from, is on here. The police will eat this alive. And if they don't, the press will." Rick laughed, a dry, broken sound. "You think you can scare me?" He snapped his fingers, and half a dozen men stood from their seats, hands on their weapons. My blood ran cold, but Derek only smiled, a wolfish grin. Wrong move. The front doors crashed open. Sheriff cruisers flooded the parking lot, red and blue lights flashing through the windows. Real lawmen stormed in, weapons drawn. Turns out, Daniel had slipped the evidence to his old Navy SEAL buddy, who now worked with federal investigators. We hadn't come to fight, we'd come to end this with the one thing Rick never expected. The truth. Rick tried to run. He shoved past his own men, bolting for the back exit, but Derek was faster. He slammed him into the wall, forearm across his throat. "You laid a hand on my sister," Derek growled, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "If it were up to me, you wouldn't leave this room alive. But she deserves better than blood. So you're going to rot in a cell instead." Rick's face twisted with fear as deputies dragged him away, his empire crumbling piece by piece. The aftermath was like watching a storm clear. The HOA was dismantled overnight, its members arrested, their assets frozen. Families who had been silenced for years finally spoke up, their voices filling courtrooms with stories of threats, fines, abuse. Our neighborhood changed. The fear that once lived in every shadow was gone, replaced with laughter, with trust, with freedom. And Sarah, she healed. Her bruises faded, but more than that, her spirit glowed brighter than ever. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip low, she took my hand and whispered, "You didn't just fight for me, you fought for everyone." My throat tightened. But before I could answer, Derek and Daniel joined us. Beers in hand, Derek smirked, clinking bottles. "To family," he said. Daniel added quietly, "To justice." I looked around at the people I loved, at the home we fought to protect, and felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. The war was over. The HOA was gone. And in the silence that followed, I realized we hadn't just won back our street weed, won back our lives.